Hey, welcome back, everybody. Of course, my name is Dr. Keith McNally, and this is the Question Guy podcast. I am here with Rick, and I'm going to get this right. Rick Pascal,
That's it. Yes.
and I've got your book, Detour, and there's your book. And so we're going to take a look into all this is a short story book. So it's filled with at least 15, 20 short stories of
17
the,
actually,
what's that?
plus a poem. 17 plus a poem that I included with homage to my dad, who used to write a lot of poetry. But the poem in there, and he wrote most of the poems to my mother as love poems, but there was one he wrote for my children, which is sort of a weird, scary poem called the Double DD. That's
And
in
that's
that
what's in
first book.
here.
That's in there,
That's
yes.
what's in
So I
here.
included that as an homage to my father.
And can talk to me about that because what is the double? And it says double
Double
D
DD,
D E E. So double
the
D.
double DD.
What is that?
Yes,
Tell me about that poem.
it's a fantastical bird that has double of everything. It has four eyes and four mouths and four ears and extra legs and the and be careful, it'll lure you into his cave and it'll eat you and be and I like the end of it, and where you once were, you are not.
That's
That's
right.
how it ends.
So these are short stories of
Yeah.
more on the thriller, sci-fi,
Thriller
X-Files.
sci-fi,
Yeah.
yes.
So
Well, as a child, I was a lover of the weird comic books, the Tales from the Crypt, the Vault of Horror. There used to be a television program called Lights Out that was a scary program in the early 50s, late 40s, early 50s.
mhm.
And it was hosted by a man by the name of Frank Gallup, who had a very eerie, mysterious voice. And the light shone up as if you hold a flashlight to your chin, and that's the effect it had. And it had the scary tales. And as I grew older, I fell in love with Twilight Zone, and I started reading Stephen King, and I love Stephen King type stories, scary. And I love the O. Henry stories that had twist endings, and the Poe stories that were kind of frightening stories like The Pit and the Pendulum or The Telltale Heart or
Mm.
those kinds of stories. And I actually didn't write stories until about 6, 7 years ago. That's when I started writing short stories.
So
And I'll
was
tell you
was
how I
this the
got into
first?
it.
Was this the
That's my
first?
first, my premiere, my debut book.
Wow. So
Yeah.
after knowing and falling in love with the genre doesn't necessarily lead into writing the genre. So what got you into writing
Ah,
this?
that's an excellent question.
I appreciate that.
Back in the late 90s, I've been, while I was in college, I was an engineering student. And I had fallen in love with performing. When I was 20 years old, I went to a summer camp, and I went up early before the camp started. And long story short, the dramatic counselor inspired me to play the role of Sky Masterson in Guys and Dolls.
Okay.
And I came home with stars in my eyes. I wanted to drop out of engineering school and pursue theater. And my
Wow.
parents talked me out of it. I put that in the back burner until the late 90s, until I got into community theater with my wife, who was also the same thing. She wanted to be an actress, but decided that it wasn't the kind of life that she wanted to live. So we both got into community theater at the same time. Flash forward 15 years in the future, I was starring in a one act play. And I mentioned to the director that I had an idea for a Twilight Zone story that I had been allowing to germinate for about 20 years that I never wrote. It was just an idea that I had. And she said, "Why don't you write it as a play?" So I sat down, I wrote it as a play, and it was too complex for them to do it as a one act play. So I said to myself, I think when I just wrote the play, I wrote it as a dialogue, is what the play is, with some description of the action. I said, why don't I develop the characters in more detail and the plot in more depth? And I wrote it as a short story. And that's in my book. It's called They Answer Our Prayers.
hmm
And I was trying to find a title for that. It was a "Be careful what you wish for." And I did a search and I came up with an Oscar Wilde quote that said, "When the gods want to punish us, they answer our prayers." So that was, I thought, that's a great idea for a title of a story. And I wrote that story. And then I said, that was fun. I wrote another short play, which was also too complex for a one-act play. I was guessing not a short play writer, one-act play writer. I tend to have a lot of description in there. So I wrote that as a short story, and that's in the book also, called Stay With Me. And
So, well, let's go back. So let's kind of give some teasers out because I do want people to jump on this, get this, because it's actually rather um you'll fall asleep at night, but because it's not gonna scare you to death, but it's interesting and it just grabs you. So let's talk about that. Where is it? I'm looking for it. Now I can't find it. The story is
what?
about the first one you mentioned.
Oh, they answer our prayers.
So the story's about two people, two guys, right?
Yes,
And one was he made it to the top of his industry, but he was arrogant and he was just mean to people, and he committed some type of fraud, and so he lost his job, and now he's
that's
this.
the second guy.
Well,
No, the
no, it's
big.
the first.
Oh, the first guy moved
So
up.
he
Yes, and
becomes a street. He lives on the street.
yes, he lost it all.
He lost it all. The second guy is kind of like the same, except he's got everything, and somehow their person, not their physical being, but their person, they switch.
Transmography or something, whatever you want to
Yeah.
call it. Their personas switch, where the first guy becomes the homeless guy. He
Mhm.
wishes he had everything. He said, "I had it all. I lost it. I want it back." He sees this very wealthy man with a beautiful wife, and he said, "I wish I were here. I wish I were here." And
Yeah, they
they
switch over.
switch. And
But
then there's "Be careful what you wish
be
for."
careful what you wish for because we got to give this away because this is the one teaser.
Okay,
What
spoiler alert.
happens?
Spoiler
Spoiler
alert.
alert, what
He
happens?
becomes the wealthy man.
Right.
And he is thrilled now. He's sitting in the restaurant facing a beautiful woman who's his wife, and he can't wait to get home to his wife and get into bed with her. And they get home, and quick to the end, she poisons him. He dies, and she has a lover, and
Mhm.
they try to run away. As a matter of fact, at first, I just ended it that way, and I said,
Well,
I can't end it that way, that they just get away with murder. So I
well,
changed it so they get caught in another way.
but the other person, when he gets transformed into the bum on the street,
He goes
something happens to
crazy.
him. Yeah.
He goes crazy. He can't believe, what am I in this bum's body? And he runs out in traffic and gets hit by a car and dies.
So oh my
So
God.
both men are dead at the end of it.
So that's kind of not. And so when I kind of went back and forth with you over email, I'm saying there's a lot of death, these weird deaths that occur in the
Yeah.
book, but then not everything ends in that way. And so
No, there's a cute little one called the flower box, or the flower pot,
and
which
that
is the story I wrote, sort of comedic, about flowers getting along.
well,
And
there's a
and
lot of
oh
innuendos
yes, yes,
about other types
it's
of
a little
things.
risque when the bumblebee comes along, or the butterfly comes along.
And so and so I have to applaud you, your use of words, your ability to take the reader and just kind of imagine that, and it's really good. And so how did you develop, is that innate to you, or how did you develop
That's a
your
good
writing skills?
question. I think, what is creativity and imagination? Where does that come from?
Yeah.
And I tried to think of it, because many people have asked me, where do I come up with the ideas for these stories? Some of them are, and I remember I took some writing courses online, specifically writing short stories, and there were a lot. One of the directors of the course said, "Don't be afraid to share your ideas with another writer. They're not going to steal your story. They may use your idea, if you have 10 writers with the same germ of an idea, you get 10 completely different stories,
Hmm.
all based on the same thing, but they're different stories. So I found that if I found a story from, let's say, a 1950s movie, there was a 1950s movie called When Worlds Collide
Hmm.
about two planets coming towards the Earth. One of them crashes into the Earth, and the other is a haven for people who are able to escape the Earth and get to the other planet. And I use that idea about I think it's in my last story about stellar rendezvous, where a black hole is discovered outside the in the heliosphere, outside Pluto's orbit, and it's headed for the Earth. And the question is this black hole going to come into our solar system and devour the planets?
Hmm.
And that's sort of a worlds colliding thing. Um, there was another one called Invaders from Mars, where Martians capture Earthlings and implant a device in the back of their neck that they can control them with. And that was the germ of the idea for Hair's Breadth, where in this case, I made the Russians the bad guys, and they come up with an idea of a
Toupee.
hairpiece, the
Yeah.
toupee, where they can plant microchips and will control the Americans and cause them to do things. I thought that was cute. You may get an idea of that, and I got an idea because of the the baldness idea. So I use that as a germ of an idea. One case, a lawyer friend gave me an idea. He says, I got a case that I worked on that could be an interesting story. And that was Eduardo's death.
Oh.
And that is almost not quite the same. I changed the name and a few other circumstances, but that is very much like a case that he tried. And another friend read it. He says, that's like a good mystery story, but it has a twist ending, which was different from the ending that my lawyer friend gave me. So where do you
But
get these ideas? Little,
so that's good. Where do you get the ideas, but also your ability to draw the reader in because you have a really good way of using words. And I've, through email kind of told you that part of the story you allow the reader to kind of surmise what the ending may be because of your specific use of words.
yeah.
How did you really, so you got really good at that.
Uh, Thank you. Thank you. I worked at it. I sit with a dictionary and thesaurus
Okay.
when I write. I always look for different ways of saying something. Um, I try some cute things when I do a story, uh, things that may be known to me, a little clue, if you will. And if the reader picks up on it, it may enhance the story. If
Yeah.
the reader doesn't pick up on it, doesn't make any difference.
Right. I mean,
Um,
yeah, it doesn't take away, but it definitely, it makes you think and it really
yeah,
it wants the reader, like for me, and I'll just use me, I wanted to get to the end to kind of, was I thinking on the right track? What was going on? And because so I want some kind of conclusion,
well, the
to
very first story, it opens, Charlie Flunk was a victim of his name
yeah. Oh my
in the money
gosh.
hunt. Okay, so you know something about this guy, and it goes downhill from there.
Of all the stories, and I think is that the first one?
Yeah,
It's
money hungry.
Money Hungry. Um, I was kind of sad with that one because
Yeah,
he was uh, uh, he was himself, but he was also living in this community where people were generally mean.
they were.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
his
like,
landlady.
yeah,
Here's something I
everybody
did.
picked on him
Yeah,
throughout his life.
and then he got the chance to get back at them,
Yeah,
but it didn't work. I mean, every time he put his hand in his pocket, found a $10 bill, and
but
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 there's a
something
consequence
changed.
to that. Yes, the funny thing I did with that, his landlady, her name was Mrs. Radford. That was my fourth grade teacher's name, Mrs. Radford. Nobody liked her.
Oh my gosh.
So I did
So that's
that for
like an
fun of her.
inside joke, I guess.
That was a personal inside joke.
Okay.
Um, in the story Forever Friends, which was a little different. Um, it is a surprise. I think it's a surprise ending about the two women. One's name is Mary Joseph, and her girlfriend's name is Joan Darcy.
Mm.
So I don't know if you pick up on that. Mary
Well,
Joseph,
marriage, you know,
Mary and Joseph. I
but
mean,
yeah, the Bible, you know, it's
all right,
that was
she's
what
a
I picked up
good,
on.
she's a basically innocent person, Mary Joseph, goodness.
Right.
But she gets into trouble and she needs help. And who helps her? Joan Darcy,
No,
Joan of
I'm
Arc.
not I'm not immediately aware of that what that means.
Joan Darcy, Joan D apostrophe ARC,
Okay.
Joan of Arc,
Okay.
is her
There you go.
savior. So that you see,
The well, I want to go? Can we talk about my favorite story in
yes,
the book?
please. Which is that?
I'm not, I always forget titles, but I will. I think it's Visions of
That's one
Visions
of
of
my
Laurel
favorites, Visions of
Visions of
Lorelei.
Lorelei. Is
I
it
love that
Lorelei?
story. I love that story.
Is that how
I
you
read
pronounce her
that
name?
again and I said, I love that story.
So Visions of Lorelei is
Yeah.
about a young man who starts
Hmm.
having dreams of this girl,
Yes.
and the dreams are so vivid they're real, right?
Yes.
They and but then we find out that Lorelei is also having dreams of the
Dreams
boy,
of with the boy.
right? And but what and so this is where I say your use of words without telling the audience, your reader, what's going on, you do tell the audience, the reader, what's going on because of how you use certain words. We then pick up the fact that Lorelei is probably not living in the same space, time frame,
If you want
country.
to give it away, that's a
Yeah.
spoiler.
You
But
don't
they're both
necessarily,
in each other's dreams and they
but they
communicate
are.
with each other in their dreams. But there's something strange about
Hmm.
how did that happen? And
So
that's the Twilight Zone-ish type
yeah, and I
story
think
for
that,
that.
and like I said, he's a boy, so he's growing up, and so he's really, he becomes a teenager, and then he becomes a college student, becomes an adult. So he's really wanting, I think, to have this relationship.
He falls in love with her
Yeah, he wants to have this
and she
relationship,
falls in love with him too.
but this is
But
what,
her friend convinces her,
yeah,
you're dreaming about this boy. How can you fall in love with a guy in your dreams? They don't know that they're real people,
yeah.
but they're in love with the person in their dreams.
But then you make it so sad
Yeah.
because
Well, I left it open ended
no,
because
it was a beautiful,
friends of mine said, why don't you expand this into a
novel. Yeah,
into a novel?
yeah.
Yeah, it could be because I left it open ended because he meets somebody at the end.
Who
Yeah.
is generations,
Yeah.
past Lorelei. So that
Yeah.
was my favorite my favorite story.
Well, I wrote that. I just made up the story. You ask me, where do you get the ideas from? It's you can look at reality and say, what if this strange thing happened? What if there were a monster? Or what if something strange happened or something weird? And
You've got monsters in here
then you
too.
let your mind just wander. Yeah, I was watching two movies from the 50s last night on Netflix. One was called The Day the Earth Exploded,
Wow.
and the other one was The Magnetic Monster. One was from 1953, one was from 1957. And it's so hokey, so corny. The dialogue is so stilted. And I'm saying, gosh, if they could write kooky stories like that, sci-fi, I mean, anybody can write a story. And sometimes the crazier, the better. I mean, Stephen King wrote a short story about a car that ate people.
Yeah.
When you open a door, that was its mouth, and it drew you in and it ate you and consumed you. That's makes no sense at all, but it was a terror story in weird sci-fi. So, I mean, there's all kinds of concepts of stories that
So
make
there
good
are
sense.
people out there like myself I started writing. Um, what would you recommend, for people who kind of want to get into one, writing, and two, writing the weird stories?
Well, the weird stories is there was a poet by the name of T.S. Eliot. I'm sure people have heard T.S. Eliot. He wrote. I remember reading one of his poem in college. What was the name of it? Can't remember the name of it at this moment. It'll come back to me. But he's quoted as saying, "Good writers borrow, great writers steal." So you can't plagiarize. That's absolutely no.
Right.
But when you can borrow the idea from something, uh, go back into a movie that you saw, or even a story that you read that's old, and bring it up to date. Um, Watch some old television programs. Um, find old comic books that have little stories. Today they're called graphic novels. We used to
Yeah.
call them comic books.
Yeah.
And um, something that's out of the ordinary. Um, there's a story in my new book that was inspired by an idea that I had when I was in college.
Hmm.
Uh, I would come home from school. I commuted from Long Island to Brooklyn to school, which was a long commute. My father worked not far from the college, Pratt Institute, and I lived in Valley Stream, Long Island. So it was about a 3/4 of an hour drive. So I get home, it would be late, and I'd have a load of homework to do. And my father would call me down to dinner, and I'd say, I don't have time for dinner. I'm too busy. I got so much work to do. And I finally relented, went to dinner. I said, I wish somebody could invent a pill that would make you feel like you've completed a dinner, would give you all the nutrition, and you would affect your brain as if you remembered you had a roast beef dinner with a side of mashed potatoes and peas or whatever. Well, I wrote the story called An Acquired Taste, which is in my second book, about a girl who invents a pill that can replace your dinner.
Wow.
And everything is great. NASA uses it for long distances. Business people use it to save time, but there's a downside. What happens after you use the pill for a couple of years? I'm not going to say what happens,
Well, good, because we need to read
but
it.
it's
So,
called
so
Acquired
you have
Taste, and
an,
that's where I got the idea from.
so you have another book coming out. Yes?
Coming out, it's called Next Stop Unknown.
Okay. And when
It's
it,
18 more stories. I spoke to the publisher yesterday, and they said they sent it to the printer, and within 10 days I should have the proof copy of the book. And after that, so 10 days from now, it'll be end of February, or maybe the first week in March, it'll be available. And because it's self-published, it's available. It'll be on Amazon, both hard copy and ebook. But I think the publisher's name is Bootlocker, Book Locker. Sorry,
book
not
log,
Bootlocker,
okay.
Book Locker.
Okay.
And I think they'll offer a discount if you buy it directly from them.
Okay.
So, but that was fun. The hard part was having a title for the book. It's difficult to have a title when you've got so many different stories. Each story is an independent story. It's got its own genre, sort of. Like Detour. How did I get Detour? Well, one of the stories in my first book is called Detour, and I was always thrilled about alternate universes. And there's a guy who takes a detour from an ordinary trip to the supermarket, and he comes back, and something is strange.
Everything is strange.
Everything is strange.
Yeah.
And so I thought that Detour would also be a good idea for the book, because these stories take you off the main road into some alternate reality, which is what these stories are. And with The Next Stop Unknown, there's a story about a man who falls asleep on the bus, and it takes him into a new town that something strange happens to him there. So the next stop was unknown. And I think that leads to there's another idea about my little clue. His name is Alton Neville in that
Is this in
story.
your second?
In my second book, his name is Alton Neville. Well, I try to make names that are meaningful to the story. Alton, old town. Neville, new village. So Alton goes to and he has a windfall. That's the name of the town. So Alton Neville goes to Windfall, and something happens to him, and it's positive. It's a little more of a love story, but the strangeness of that is the odd coincidences that occur, which are really too coincidental to happen in with such frequency. So that's the nature of that story,
Well, Rick,
and that just came up out of my okay.
I love this book. I'm looking forward
Thank
to your
you.
next book. And after I read it, we got to come back on the call and talk about it because you've inspired me to kind of be more creative in my own writing. I have a certain writing technique and a certain, writing platform that I go after, but just to kind of do something different, it's a lot of fun.
It is. I went online before I wrote any stories, and I took a sort of a test, if you will. The outfit asked me to send a copy of my two of my stories to him,
Okay.
and they came back and said, "Yes, you should continue writing short stories." I knew that writing a novel is going to be a monumental task. Short stories would come faster. The
Right.
only problem with a book of short stories is it doesn't take that long to write. And each time you write it, you've got to come up with a new idea, new characters, new plots, new twists, and that's the challenge in those kinds of short stories. So, but again, in my new book, my doctor gave me two ideas. He says, I got an idea for a short story. He says, five guys go into the woods on a camping trip and four guys come out. And one of them says, hey, where's Joe? And the other say, Joe is never with us. What are you talking about?
Oh my.
So, so I took that as an idea and wrote a different story about it. So I didn't use that exact idea. I made up my own story from that idea.
Well, Rick,
And,
I appreciate this conversation. Again, when it comes out in what, March this
yeah,
year,
early March.
then give me some time to read it and then we'll jump back on a call.
Terrific.
Sound good?
Okay. Okay.
Well,
So
again, go ahead.
no, I saying you want to call it. My phone is ringing. Wife will get it.
So, for everybody who's watching, of course, this is Rick Pascal, and of course, my name is Dr. Keith McNally, and we appreciate you joining us on another edition of the Question Guy podcast. We'll see you next time. Take care.